Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz bassist Avery Sharpe. He opened up with us about his newest 2019 CD called 400, and it is all about movement from the Middle Passage to the Great Migration North, across to Europe, into the World Wars, and home again in the segregated United States to the upsurge of the freedom movement itself. He started playing piano at the age of 8 and also studied accordion when he was younger. He learned both electric and acoustic bass as a teenager, then studied with the great Reggie Workman, and all that experience he had with John Coltrane at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. From there, he would play with the best in jazz. From 1984 to 2002, he was a part of McCoy Tyner's trio. He has learned quite a bit over the years, and he has great insights. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends. Avery, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. It's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
So I want to talk to you about 400, and I want to know this. What was the artistic vision for this project?
Well, I think the artistic vision was to try to, when I write, I always try to have some kind of theme or some kind of meaning. And if you, for some unknown reason, I've kind of been getting on the sort of historical thing. Well, I know why, because, I love history. And my sort of last 3 or 4 records have been, sort of historical figures. And in thinking about the 400th anniversary of recorded that Africans were brought to the U.S. shores, I just started thinking about the whole history of how that came about, and just artistically, I wanted to express that, and so I was thinking about it. It was kind of really difficult. In other words, trying to put 400 years into some sort of musical statement. So I kind of approached it more as a musical portrait, meaning that thinking about the music that has been that came out of that whole, horrific experience. Beginning with the American music is, without the African influence, it would not be American music. So I sort of segued it up into 100-year increments, thinking about the arrival, 1619 to 1719, and then the colonial period from 1719 to 1819, and then the antebellum Civil War, and thinking about the music that came out of that. There's a tune that I put on the album called New Music, which is basically ragtime and the music that came out of New Orleans. And then thinking about the last 100 years of 1919 to 2019, which incorporated World War II, the blues, the apex of the Civil Rights era, and then to what we have now, with Obama and I don't know what we call this, what we have now, but and moving forward.
So what I want to do is I want to get kind of a historical crosscut of you as a musician and where you came from. And I know that when you started playing music very young in your life, where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Valdosta, Georgia, which I really don't know about because my father was in the service, in the Air Force. He actually started off in World War II, and then was in the Navy, and then went to the Army, Air Force, and eventually Air Force. We're originally from the South, and when I was a few months old, he got stationed in Guam. I went to Guam for a couple of years, and he came back to Savannah, Georgia, where I lived for 7 years. And people have to remember that was the segregated South when I was born. And then my father was stationed in Plattsburgh, New York. So I went from where there was no snow. I think I saw snow one time. It was a freak snowstorm in Savannah, to Plattsburgh, New York, near the Canadian border where there was nothing but snow. And like I said, being in the segregated South, I didn't have any white friends until we moved to New York. And then in 1955, the Vietnam War, it was called conflict at that time, was just beginning. And there's 8 of us total, but at the time my father there was 7 of us. I'm number 6. And he was 39 years old and fought in World War II. It was a support for the Korean War. And they wanted to send him to Vietnam. So he was like, I don't think so. So he didn't want to go back south in 1965. And my mother's a piano player in the church, and particularly the Church of God in Christ, Sanctified Church, Holy Roller, and that's the church that I grew up in. And she did a revival in Springfield, Massachusetts, and told my father about it. She said it might be a nice place if you want to lead the service, because they had Westover Air Force Base was an active Air Force base right next to Springfield, Massachusetts at that time. So this was like in April of 1965, and in August 1965 we were in Springfield, Massachusetts. So I went to, like junior high school, was raised in the area. So I mainly grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I went to the University of Massachusetts, where I met people like Max Roach, Archie Sharpe. They were there. They were living in Amherst at the time, and Reggie Workman was my first bass teacher. Reggie Work played with John Coltrane, and he was coming up from Philadelphia a couple times a week to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. At that time, it was Fred Tillis who started the jazz program. Later, he's the one that helped bring people like Max Rhodes there. Horace Boyer, one of my mentors, who was also a gospel singer and one of the foremost historians on gospel music. And it was the mid-70s, so it was a special time, because during that time, Billy Taylor, I believe, was working on his doctorate. The great Billy Taylor, before his name became a bad word, Bill Cosby was working on his master's and a doctorate at that time at the University of Massachusetts. It was a really hot period. So that's kind of, sort of my formulations, or the way that I was, where I was raised. And when I got the opportunity to play with people, because of Archie Sharpe, who took me to Europe, and people like Art Blakey and McCoy started hearing about me, and they wanted me, to be in their bands. And so most people think that I live in New York, but I stayed in Massachusetts because I come from a large family. We have 4 kids, and it was really the only way that I could be on the road in good conscience, knowing that my wife had a good support system, and plus I was just like Massachusetts culturally. So.
Yeah, so you started out on the piano, you learned the accordion, and as a teenager you got into the bass. Why was the bass the instrument that you landed on?
Well, I started on piano because, my mother was a piano player, and she gave all of us piano lessons, but I was the first one that it kind of stuck with. And then I went to accordion, I was a strange kid. But accordion might have worked maybe in Louisiana, New Orleans, but accordion in Springfield, Massachusetts just was not really happening. But I could fight, so people left me alone. And then by the time I was like 16, I was listening to a lot of music coming out of the Church of God in Christ. My mother was into the church, but my father wasn't. There's a big separation between secular and sacred. And if you're playing music in church, you're not really supposed to be playing music, as they say, for the devil. So anything, jazz, pop music, all that stuff was not in service of the Lord. But I was fortunate my father was not in the church, so he brought a lot of other music into the house. Duke Ellington, Count Basie. He was listening to the stuff that my older brothers and sisters were listening to. The stuff from Motown, Stax Records, James Brown, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I wish I could give some esoteric reason why I got interested in the bass. But I was at 16. I was like, a lot of adolescent boys. I was interested in girls, and I thought girls liked bass players. So I started, playing bass. Actually, I started playing bass in church, and also I had a folk group as well. And so that's kind of really how I got interested in bass. I mean, I always heard a lot of bass lines, being of the beginnings of the TV generation. So all those shows, those TV shows, I always heard the bass lines and always kind of identified with them and loved them. And then listening to all the Motown stuff, which was, James Jamerson, a great bass player, trying to imitate all that stuff. And so that's kind of how I originally got interested in electric bass. And then once I got to college, I guess by today's standards, I really started playing upright bass late. I didn't start upright bass until I was 19 because I met Reggie Workman, the cat played with Coltrane, and I started getting more and more into jazz. And so that's kind of how I got attracted to bass.
So one of your longest musical associations was obviously with McCoy Tyner, and I want to know, what did you learn from him? What was the ultimate, after all the decades and all the shows and all of the stories and everything that you got from him, what did you really ultimately take away from him, not only as a musician, but as a human being?
I guess Herbie Hancock kind of summed it up with his book, Possibilities. I think that's what I got from McCoy is the really great thing about McCoy is that he's so secure in his playing that he gives everybody space, which I wouldn't be the player that I am today if he hadn't given me so much space. I mean, he would just cut out. You know, lots of bass players, didn't like that. It's like, the band is playing and all of a sudden, boom, everybody stops. There's no chord, there's no rhythm. And, if you're playing with McCoy, I mean, he's played everything up front of the sun, and now you have to solo. And that helped me immensely because it made me rise to a certain level. I mean, this is not something that he sat down and said. It's just something that he did. And going back to Possibilities, McCoy never played a tune the same way. He never did the introduction that he would do. He never did it the same way. And sometimes he wouldn't even tell me what tune he was going to play. He would just start the introduction. But there's 12 keys. So we're in D flat, and I'm like, there could be one of 12 tunes that we play. Then he might give me a 2 or 3 note cadence to let me know what tune it is. But I think that the main thing that I learned from him, try to be a decent human being and really try to perfect your craft at the same time. I think that's probably why we were together for so long. Our personalities are similar in that whenever a challenge would come up, sometimes people get all excited and start screaming or yelling and rolling the floor. And I would watch McCoy. He would just look and immediately go to plan B. There's not like, he doesn't spend the energy worried about the problem. He spends the energy solving the problem right there. And that can be on a life level, a life lesson level, and also on a musical level. It's because in the end, jazz musicians, what we are doing, whether we realize it or not, we're problem solvers. How do I make the changes of giant steps sound like something? How do I negotiate? How do I navigate those changes? That's problem solving. We're improvising. We're constantly doing that. So I think that in problem solving, like I said, with just life stuff, watching stuff on the road, how McCoy dealt with stuff. And like I said, he's not going to be the kind of guy that sits you down and say, "Oh, you do this." He just does more by example, which was really a perfect fit for me because that's kind of the way I live my life. I don't, I just do by example. I think to me, that's the best way rather than, telling people exactly what they should do. Once they ask, then you point out maybe how to get there, but at first you let them kind of figure it out.
You've been fortunate to be around a lot of people, a lot of big names over your career, Don Braden, Wynton Marsalis, Pat Metheny. There's been so many people that you've played with over the years. You've seen so many changes in jazz throughout the decades. How is jazz doing in 2019?
I think jazz is fine. It's the business that's messed up. It's trying to figure out how to make a living with it. We're dealing in technology has changed the entire world. It's changed music. It's changed the way people are presented with music. You're dealing with a generation of people who are used to things for free. You just go online. If I wanted to see, Art Blakey or somebody play, I had to, save up my little coins and go down to the club and watch them play. Whereas now, you can just go to YouTube and see what Art Blakey did back in the 1960s or whatever. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's just the way things are. I think there's an abundance of talent now. There's because jazz has been more institutionalized. People are learning the craft. They're coming out and playing, and which is great. So I think there's not a lack of talent. There's probably more talent. I think what is lacking is innovation. You don't have people innovating like you did when McCoy came along or before, or Bud Powell or Dizzy or the music was was younger, and it was happening in the moment. You don't have as much of that happening now because it's just been a complete a saturation of the music. Like I said, there's a lot of talent, but I don't see a lot of innovation. And like I said, the business part of it has changed. I'm not seeing it change so much. And you can't divorce the society from the music. The whole push now is the Uberization of everything. To make everybody quote unquote independent contractors, which means you don't have to pay benefits. You don't have to things that you would have had to done. You would have been done, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So, with music now you have, which is a good thing, you have musicians being able to do self-promotion, with online and social media. But sometimes I just wonder how that affects the music. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're spending your time now promoting stuff. Where does the art come in at how do you does that get into the art at some point? I'm just asking a question. I'm not saying yay or nay. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Has that affected the music?
Along with the notion that you've seen a lot over your career, I want to kind of get hyper-local with you and ask you, at this point in your life, with everything you've done, all of the places you've traveled in the world, all of the cats you've played with, all of the albums you released, are you happy with where you're at?
No. No, I'm blessed for what I've done. I'm happy for where I'm at in terms of the accomplishments. I'm not happy with where I'm at in terms of what I want to create, because I'm always trying to, so it's like, what have you done for me lately? It's not that I'm not appreciative of what I've done. I'm very thankful for the career that I've had and what I've accomplished, but I'm not ready to be a museum piece, as Louis Hayes used to say. It's really funny that you asked that, because now I'm kind of trying to figure out what I'm going to do from here on until I leave the planet. And what I mean by that is, I could give you an example. I think Denzel Washington has done something that I think is pretty cool. He's doing August Wilson's play. The last one he did was Fences. But I think he's given himself this task to do every one of August Wilson's play in film version. That's going to take, at least another 20 years. So he's kind of giving himself a gig for the next 20 years. And I've kind of been thinking, what can I do, because I'm not so much worried about, I am worried about money like everybody, but I'm more worried about artistically what I need to do from here to the next, however many years I have left on the planet. So I'm trying to find myself with a project that's kind of similar to that kind of has that kind of longevity, that gives me something to do until I leave.
So everything's going to come down to this. I want to get to the essence, kind of the soul of who you are, and I want to know this. Everyone has a perception of you. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself best. So tell me, who do you think you are?
Well, I hope I'm a bright spirit. That's what I hope I am. And that's what I try to be. And I hope that encompasses, I try to be that first, and I think that kind of dictates the way other people look at me. if I try to be a bright spirit, then automatically I try to be a good father. I try to be a good husband. I try to be a good friend. I try to be just a good citizen. I try to be, we have 4 kids. I used to tell my kids, I'm sorry you were born into this family, but I had you so that I could put something positive out here. So your obligation here, not to me, but just to yourself and to society, is to put something positive and to see this place in a better condition than when you found it. What we always think doesn't mean that that's what's true.
Perfect, man. Avery, hey, thanks again. Good luck with the album, and thank you for all the music that you've given the world of jazz. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Georgia, Massachusetts, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Avery for his time and his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.